for all things Halloween. This is Hauntformer, and welcome back to a discussion and review of the CREEPSHOW series on Shudder. I was pretty excited for this series, not gonna lie, when it was announced about maybe a year or two ago. It was in development for a while, and finally it was put on Shudder as of late September 2019, and I just finally finished watching this series after several months of getting around to it. I had some time on my hands, so I can finally discuss and review for you CREEPSHOW. So I guess we need to talk about the history of this series before we jump into everything. We're going to start with the original premise of CREEPSHOW. CREEPSHOW itself is a movie from the 1980s that was directed by George Romero from the Living Dead series, as you probably know him. And a lot of the stories in that film were written by Stephen King. These were short stories that Stephen King wrote that were adapted to the big screen. And the premise was to base the stories out of a comic book format, especially the EC comics. You can watch my entire review on CREEPSHOW to get a better history of the film, but essentially the EC comics, the Tales of the Crypt and things of that nature were really popular kind of before the Comics Code era. And so that whole horror comic outline was perfect for a film that George Romero ended up doing called CREEPSHOW. It had 5 segments in it. The sequel, CREEPSHOW 2, had 3 segments in it. And now we have a series that is executively produced by Greg Nicotero from The Walking Dead on Shudder, which is kind of the horror Netflix, if I had to explain it. There are 6 episodes in the series with 2 segments per episode for a whopping total of 12 unique, horrifying, and fun segments in this show. So, first thing I'm going to do is give an overview of the entire series, what I thought about it, the pros and the cons of the show, and then I'm going to go into each episode and each segment specifically and talk about which ones I really liked, which ones I didn't, and what they could have done differently in the segments, and I'll tell you which ones were my favorites of the bunch. So just on an initial outset, I really overall like the series quite a bit. I'm a big fan of anthology horror because it gives you a nice little concept, some really cool creativity, and a little bit of thrill, and boom, you're off to the next story. I really like that concept in the world of horror. I also liked a lot of the episodes and how they were paced. They were very quick and to the point. I liked the creatures, I liked the special effects in the show, and above all, CREEPSHOW is about creativity and fun and scares. You have to have kind of all 3 to make CREEPSHOW work. CREEPSHOW was never the scariest film ever. It's nothing super dark or intense. They are kind of light-hearted horror stories with a mix of comedic satire in them, and I enjoy the films and a lot of this series because of that basic premise and outline. Now, there are some limitations and cons to the show. Not every segment is as strong as some other ones. Some of them don't have really good payoffs, in my opinion. I'll go into which ones don't. They just didn't really offer that much to me. What makes CREEPSHOW work is usually there's like a life lesson about like revenge or about heartbreak or about remorse within a overall unsettling narrative that makes the show fun. And some of the episodes just didn't really carry anything, but most of them had a unique style that I liked. With the comic book outline, with the colors, it really harkened back to the Romero film. Now, one thing that was obvious from the get-go, and at first maybe I didn't care for the series and it took me a while to get back into it, was due to the budgetary restraints of the show. This is a series that premiered on Shudder, which isn't the biggest thing right now. It is in terms of horror fans and people like me, but in terms of the general audience, not a lot of people have Shudder, and therefore the budget for this was probably not as big as, say, a Netflix original or something like that, like Stranger Things. And you can see that from the beginning. how the shots are composed can be simplistic at times. The effects can seem a little... I don't know how to describe it, because they have a nice charm to them, and I enjoy them, but they can seem not quite as Hollywood as some people might like. And at first, it took me a little bit to adjust to them. I am a student filmmaker, and it takes a lot to produce something that looks good, so I get it. And especially with a low budget, I can see why they had troubles, especially with some of the concepts introduced in CREEPSHOW. But for what it's worth, they did a good job. I really love a lot of the effects. Tom Savini did a lot of the monster designs and the gore, and even directed an episode, which I'll get to. And that was really cool. Greg Nicotero, you can tell, has a passion for the subject material of CREEPSHOW. He was friends with George Romero. He knows the goings-on, and he wanted to make a series that paid homage to those films with the passing of George Romero. And honestly, this is a really great homage to an awesome filmmaker and a truly remarkable film from the 80s with a really nice show. It is renewed for Season 2, and I am so excited because not only is it going to be kick butt, but it also, I believe, is premiering on AMC. I don't know about for their Fear Fest, which would be sweet, but only time will tell. And they're going to do reruns of the first season, I believe, so you can catch up on the episodes I'm about to discuss. So, those are my overall thoughts about the show. Some budgetary restraints, but overall the creativity and the fun carried the show along. And again, I'm a sucker for anthology horror. CREEPSHOW is kind of the king of that stuff, so that's really good to see that CREEPSHOW is still on top of its game. So now what I'm going to do is I'm pulling up a list here of all of the episodes, because there are 12 segments, 6 episodes. So there's a lot that I want to dive into with each one. So I'm going to talk about them and give an overall kind of ranking of each episode and specifically each segment, because each segment is its own story. So episode 1 has 2 segments. The first is called Gray Matter, which was actually a story by Stephen King. And the second is called The House of the Head. Now, Gray Matter stars Tobin Bell and a few other guys as these cops investigating a father who has a drinking problem, and he has a grudge kind of against his son. And eventually, the drinking forms like a goo on his skin, and he becomes like a big blob monster that wants to eat everybody. And the story, you could definitely tell, is very King. King dealt with the father-child relationship quite a bit from his own experiences, and you can see that a lot in, like, The Shining and stuff. But this episode, to me, was a little bit off. I liked the premise. I liked the father-son dynamic. I liked the monster effects quite a bit. But the payoff of everything was a little weird. The cops just seemed to die off, and there wasn't really any resolution to the arc of that story. And the same can go for the second segment in this episode, The House of the Head, which is about a little girl who has a dollhouse in her room. And there is a little zombie head that appears in the house, and it begins to move around and actually kill the dolls in her dollhouse. Then, at the climax of the story, she finds the zombie head full-sized under her bed. And I thought that was a really cool setup, and I was waiting to see where the horror would come in. And then she just sells the dollhouse at a garage sale. And then the episode's over. When you introduce something creepy, like the little doll head killing the dolls, there has to be a real-world payoff to that. Her parents come in and stuff, and they don't quite understand what's happening. There's a little cop doll that tries to hunt down the head. I thought that was going to start happening in real life, kind of like the dollhouse was illustrating what was to come with the zombie head, but that never happened. There was no payoff to the episode. and I thought it was definitely one of the weaker entries in the bunch, despite it having a super cool concept, because at first I'm like, oh, the dollhouse is going to have some connection to this girl and to her parents. This is cool. But there was no payoff. And after this first episode, I was a little weary, because I already could see the budgetary restraints, you know. I liked the effects, I liked the creativity, but I was worried that each segment would kind of lose the payoff that made Creepshow what it was, you know? But thankfully, in my opinion, these are some of the lower episodes, and they get a lot better. There's only like one or two other ones that I had problems with. Most of the other ones I enjoyed quite a bit. Going on to episode 2, we have Bad Wolf Down and The Finger. This was a really fun episode. So, Bad Wolf Down is about a group of American soldiers that are being chased by the Nazis in World War II. And they decide to hunker down in this random cabin in the woods where this woman is, like, imprisoned. And they come to find out that this woman is a werewolf. And so, as they're being surrounded by Nazis, they allow this woman to bite all of the American soldiers, and it's a full moon, which means they all turn into werewolves and rip the shreds off of the Nazis. This was a really fun episode. This is one I was looking forward to. They premiered kind of the concept of this one and the original first episode of the show at Halloween Horror Nights last year in California. And the concept sounded awesome. Werewolves with Nazis in World War II. It just sounded great. And thankfully, this was a really fun episode, and this kind of rejuvenated my interest in the series. After episode 1 wasn't terrible, but it got off to a rocky start, at least to me. But this episode and this segment really got me interested. So, the werewolf effects look great. I thought they were really cool, really fun. You know, perhaps a little cheesy when you realize that it's people in werewolf masks. But I love the cheese. Embrace the cheese, people. Especially when it's Creepshow. The colors were solid. The Nazi uniforms were really authentic. I liked the simplicity of the story. And it lended itself well to what Creepshow is good at, which is using the comic book format to the advantage of a horror story. The second story is called The Finger, and is about an erratic man who finds a finger on the sidewalk, brings it home, and it grows into a hand, and then later grows into an entire alien, very reminiscent of Ridley Scott's Xenomorph Alien. And it begins going after the people that he hates, I think like his ex-wife and his kids, and all of these people that he hates, and bringing him body parts of them. And the end of the episode is kind of him getting arrested because of what the alien did. And people have different theories as to what this episode means. I love that. I love that it's open-ended. This was one of the higher points of the series. I really loved the way they did the puppeteering of Bob, who is this alien that the finger kind of grows into. They used some stop motion, which was kind of weird when I first saw it. I'm like, what? Oh, it's stop motion. That's interesting. But I do have a soft spot for the practical effects, and they did a good job overall. I really liked Bob and his appearance and how he played into the story. The acting's really solid, too. The lead actor is really spot on with what he's trying to accomplish in this episode. And this was a really fun one, for sure. I really dig this episode. And while the payoff wasn't quite there because we never saw what happened to the guy, I think it was nice because it left everything open-ended for the audience. Up next, we have episode 3, kind of the halfway point in the series. In this episode, we had All Hallows Eve and The Man in the Suitcase. This is one of the higher points in the show for me in terms of my enjoyment. All Hallows Eve is a very traditional Halloween story. The atmosphere felt very much like Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat, you know, with Sam, the kid with the sack mask, or like Halloween, or like Halloween 4, or whatever. It tells the story of this group of trick-or-treaters that goes house to house, kind of threatening families. You don't really know what's happening. and it's all in this revenge plot to kill these bullies that actually, this is a spoiler, I mean, I've kind of been spoiling a lot of the episodes, so I apologize, but spoiler here, they are actually ghosts seeking revenge on bullies that murdered them in their life. And how the episode played out was really cool. The set design and the way that everything looked, like the treehouse and the trick-or-treat neighborhoods, were really nice, and I enjoyed kind of the premise of the story. I also love a good Halloween tale, like set on Halloween with trick-or-treating and the pumpkins and all that. And this episode was really nice. I enjoyed the way it looked. I liked the simplistic storyline, and it had a nice little payoff at the end. And like Creepshow does, there's always like some sort of revenge or some sort of twist where someone's actually dead, and it was good. It lended itself well to the show. The other episode was one of my personal favorites of the series, The Man in the Suitcase, which follows a guy getting a suitcase from the airport that's not his. He doesn't know that. And when he gets home, opens it up, and there is a man literally folded up in the suitcase. And every time he inflicts pain on the man, like he tries to pull him out and it hurts his arm, every time that man experiences pain, he shoots gold coins out of his mouth. Which, first off, is such a weird concept that you think it would be too weird to redeem, but it does. It's a great episode. He brings his friends, his like college roommate friends over, and they start torturing this man in the suitcase to get a bunch of money, because each of the coins is like rare and worth like a lot of money, like $1,000 or something. So they start cashing all this money, buying all this stuff, torturing this guy, and the kid starts to feel guilty because they're torturing this man for the sake of themselves. And I liked that message because that's just what I'm looking for in a show, to have a good message with a good premise. And then, of course, there's a big twist, which, again, I'm going to say what the twist is, so if you don't want to hear it, skip this part for a few minutes. But the guy in the suitcase ends up being this, like, supernatural kind of, I kind of saw him as like a genie, and he ends up putting the kids in their own suitcases, destined to be tortured by the next people that want to abuse the power of the coins. I thought that was really cool. I liked the twist. I liked the premise because from the very beginning, as soon as he opens the suitcase and the guy's in there, you're intrigued, you're hooked, you're like, what's going to happen next? And then when he spits the gold coins out, I'm like, this is weird, but I like it. And I love Creepshow for that. Great episode, one of my favorite segments from the series. Up next, we have episode 4, with its 2 segments, The Companion and Linda Lane's Better Half. So, The Companion kind of plays out like the scary story of Harold from the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark book or the movie. It's about kind of this scarecrow who has life inside of it. This man, after his wife dies, builds a companion, which ends up killing an innocent girl. And later on, this boy is being chased by his, like, school bully when they encounter the scarecrow, and he uses it against his bully. A very Creepshow-esque episode. Like, it reminded me a lot of the original movie in terms of especially the character design of the scarecrow, the lighting, especially at the end with the really bright purples, and the concept felt very Creepshow, especially even going back to Creepshow 2 with Chief Woodenhead. So, I like this one. Wasn't, like, the top of my favorites. I know a lot of people really admired the look of the scarecrow and the vines, which I thought was really well done with the practical effects. Definitely a good episode. Very classic Halloween and horror. Everybody loves a good killer scarecrow, and this is certainly one of the higher points for a lot of fans for the series. Linda Lane's Better Half. I don't really know how to describe this one. It's definitely not one of the higher points of the series. I don't know. I was kind of zoned out in this one because I don't really get the whole thing. So essentially it's about this woman named Linda Lane who is like a business executive, and she gives a promotion to a guy instead of this woman at her job, which I guess they were in a relationship or something, and she feels very betrayed by Linda, and she accidentally dies, like, in the office. She, like, trips and hits her head. And so Linda Lane has to bring her into the elevator, and they get stuck in the elevator. And I don't really remember it having much of a twist ending or anything. It just kind of played out like, okay, she has to get her out of this building in the elevator. I don't know. This one felt a little off to me. It didn't quite have the Creepshow vibes. Wasn't as weirdly fun as some of the other episodes. I might have to give it a rewatch to get my full opinions on it. But while it had a cool intro, I liked where it was going with the whole business executive type thing, kind of like they're creeping up on you segment from the original Creepshow, which is my favorite one. It didn't quite reach the potential of what I thought it was gonna do with the concept. So for that reason, the companion was better in this episode for sure. Episode 5 has Night of the Paw and Times is Tough in Muskie Holler. So Night of the Paw is your typical monkey's paw story with a twist to it. So if you've ever heard the story of the monkey's paw, one of my favorite stories from, I believe, Edgar Allan Poe, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Edgar Allan Poe. It's about, of course, a paw that grants its user 3 wishes, and the wishes are kind of perverted and twisted and end up doing something really dark in the user's life. So, this woman who had to pull the plug on her husband, and by pull the plug I mean shoot him in the face, is trying to get away from that murder incident and ends up falling in the hands of this man who has the monkey's paw and tells of how his wife died because of using the paw. And of course, the woman takes the paw from him and uses it to bring back her dead husband, which of course leads to zombies, as Creepshow loves to throw zombies in. This is one of the highlights of the show. Probably my third favorite episode, maybe? I like how it played out. I like the concept of the monkey's paw. It didn't feel entirely original because it was very much like the monkey's paw, but they did a good job. The acting was really solid in this one. I remember the performances really well. It had the Creepshow traditional twists that I was looking for, and of course had zombies, and really good makeup too. Very good makeup effects in this episode. The next segment was called Times is Tough in Muskie Holler, which was a weird one, I must say. Kind of like The Man in the Suitcase, but I also digged it. About a mayor of this underground bunker town that is forced by the new sitting mayor to undergo a torture that he created along with all of the people that supported him. And the torture is essentially being strapped in a chair, being raised up through the ceiling where your head's just sticking out, and they're in a high school football field with like the Jumbotron like projecting all of this, and zombies are released from cages and eat their faces. It's really weird, but I like it because I love weird stuff. I love that Creepshow takes the risks. And if that's any sign, the season 2 is going to get even more freaky. So strap yourselves in. Prepare for madness. So this episode, I like the premise a lot. When they actually have their heads sticking out, you could tell that they did some kind of green screen work. And it worked for what it was going for, but I wish it would have been approached in a different way. The Jumbotron was a little cheesy too. It looked just like a green screen, but I'm gonna look past that. Again, those are those budgetary things that I was kind of referring to. David Arquette is in this episode. He does a pretty good job. He's only a minor character, but still a good job from all of the actors in the series. They do what they can with what they're given, seeing that it's very bizarre. But I like the segment, what it's going for. It's a relatively short segment, not really too much to say about it other than a cool concept. The Night of the Paw takes up much of the screen time of this episode, but both segments I felt like were pretty strong and delivered a powerful punch that was very refreshing. And finally, we have the last episode with its two segments, Skin Crawlers and By the Silver Water of Lake Champlain. Which, by the way, the story of that one was by Joe Hill, who is Stephen King's son, who was actually seen in the original Creepshow, and was directed by Tom Savini. That was kind of the last punch that the series had. But the first segment, Skin Crawlers, was actually my favorite of the show. I really loved Skin Crawlers, you guys. This is just a really great episode. I would say, for nothing else, if you have Shudder, watch Skin Crawlers just to see it. The premise is a Dr. Drew, Dr. Oz health guy finds these leeches that suck fat out of people. So it eliminates the need for exercise and diet, and simply the leech sucking on your body will make you look super thin and fit. And so, of course, all these, like, overweight and fat people show up, and this one guy is kind of hesitant on it, and he sees all these people go through, and they come out really thin, but he decides, I'm not going to do it. Later on, he decides, you know what, I'm going to do a live stream on the air, and this guy can be the first guy to let the leeches suck it out of him on air. And before it even happens, there is a solar eclipse, and there were, like, eggs inside of everybody. Spoilers. There were, like, eggs inside of the people's bodies because the leeches sucked out the fat but implanted eggs, and everyone starts exploding. There's gore everywhere. It's very reminiscent of Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien, in terms of the story, but I just love the weirdness of the fat-sucking leeches and then turning it into a really gory, like, alien. And then at the end, there's a really cool alien that comes out of one of the guy's chests, and it was a really sweet effect, really great animatronic and puppet work, probably by Tom Savini. This was a highlight for sure. Loved this episode. Feels like something I would love to read or watch or even make, because I love the creativity shown here, and it had a really good message too about kind of mob mentality. And then finally, the last episode that I was talking about, directed by Tom Savini and written by Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, is a story of a girl whose father died while looking for a mysterious lake monster, and she goes out to the woods, to this lake, with this guy who likes her and her younger brother, and eventually kind of a abusive fatherly figure. And they discover that Chappie, the lake monster, is real. And this is a story very much inspired by the Loch Ness Monster, but like the other first episode that I mentioned, that talked about father-son, like father-child relationships and parent-child relationships that Stephen King and apparently his son really like to do, this one actually had a decent payoff to it and a good little end to the Creepshow Season 1. So they find out that Chappie's real, that their father wasn't actually crazy, and they get to convince their mom that he was real too. I wish, so there's an ending shot where the mom sees Chappie going into the fog. I wish that was taken out, because I feel like getting the kids to convince her and for her to believe her children without actually seeing it would have made that bond between the children and the mom stronger. But I still like what the episode did, and it really wrapped up this show quite well. So that is kind of an overview of each segment of Creepshow. Certainly a lot to talk about, so I thank you for taking the time with me to discuss Creepshow. Overall, a really fun show. If you have time, please watch it and get excited for Season 2. I want to hear, if you did watch the show along with me, what was your favorite episode in the comments? I'm going to have to say Skin Crawlers was probably my favorite, followed by The Man in the Suitcase, and then maybe Night of the Paw, maybe the Finger, maybe by the Silver Water. There's a few that I really liked after that, but definitely Skin Crawlers was my favorite because the concept was great. But really, all of these concepts and all of these storylines and characters were really unique and fun and twisted and creepy. That is what makes Creepshow, and I applaud the people who worked on this show for delivering a nice series to Shudder. Thank you for watching this discussion, analysis, and review. And if you haven't, make sure to subscribe because I do creepy things all year long. Thank you for watching, and remember, as always, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.